Hey guys, welcome back to True Crime with Felicia. So today's story is about the famous serial killer Charles Manson. And this story is so long that it will be a two-part story. So before we get into this case, I would like to say I mean no disrespect to the victims or their families. If I get any of the information wrong, I am sorry. That was not my intention. The information I give is what I found in my research of this case. This case contains murder of a pregnant woman, rape, and cult activity. So if these things are a trigger for you, please feel free to back out of watching this video. I would completely understand. Your mental well-being comes first. I'm sure I will catch you again with another video. So, Charles Manson was born Charles Miles Maddox on November 12, 1934, to 16-year-old Kathleen Manson Bauer Cavender Maddox in the University of Cincinnati Academy Health Center in Cincinnati, Ohio. Manson's biological father appears to have been Colonel Walker Henderson Scott Sr. of Catlettsburg, Kentucky, against whom Kathleen Maddox filed a paternity suit that resulted in an agreed judgment in 1937. Scott worked intermittently in local mills and had a local reputation of a con artist. He allowed Maddox to believe that he was an Army colonel, although colonel was merely just his given name. When Maddox told Scott that she was pregnant, he told her he had been called away on Army business. After several months, she realized he had no intentions of returning. Manson may never have known his biological father. Now, I can't find any information confirming or denying that he knew his father or spent time with his father. In August 1934, before Manson's birth, Maddox married William Eugene Manson, a laborer at a dry cleaning business. Maddox often went on drinking sprees with her brother Luther, leaving Charles with multiple babysitters. They divorced on April 30th, 1937, after William alleged gross neglect of duty by Maddox. Charles retained William's last name, Manson. On August 1st, 1939, Luther and Kathleen Maddox were arrested for assault and robbery. Kathleen and Luther were sentenced to 5 to 10 years in prison. Manson was placed in the home of his aunt and uncle in McMeekin, West Virginia. His mother was paroled in 1942. Manson later characterized the first few weeks after she returned from prison as the happiest time in his life. Weeks after Maddox's release, Manson's family moved to Charleston, West Virginia, where Manson continuously skipped school and his mother spent her evenings drinking. Maddox was again arrested for grand larceny, but was never convicted. The family later moved to Indianapolis, where Maddox met an alcoholic, Lewis Woodson Carpenter Jr., through Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, and married him in August 1943. In an interview with Diane Sawyer, Manson said that when he was 9, he set his school on fire. Manson also got in trouble for truancy and petty theft. Although there was a lack of foster home placements in 1947, at the age of 13, Manson was placed in the Guybolt School for Boys in Terre Haute, Indiana, a school for male delinquents ran by Catholic priests. Guybolt was a strict school where punishment for even the smallest infraction included beatings with either a wooden paddle or a leather strap. Manson ran away from Guybolt and slept in the woods, under bridges, or wherever he could find shelter. Manson fled home to his mother and spent Christmas 1947 in McMeekin at his aunt's and uncle's house. His mother returned him to Guybolt, and 10 months later he ran away to Indianapolis. In 1948, in Indianapolis, Manson committed his first crime by robbing a grocery store. At first, the robbery was simply to find something to eat. However, Manson found a cigar box containing just over $100, and he took the money. He used the money to rent a room on Indianapolis Skid Row and to buy food. For a time, Manson had a job delivering messages for Western Union in an attempt to live a life free of crime. However, he quickly began to supplement his wages through petty theft. He was eventually caught, and in 1949, a sympathetic judge sent him to Boys Town, a juvenile facility in Omaha, Nebraska. After 4 days at Boys Town, he and a fellow student, Nelson, obtained a gun and stole a car. They used it to commit 2 armed robberies on their way to the home of Nelson's uncle in Peoria, Illinois. Nelson's uncle was a professional thief, and when the boys arrived, he allegedly took them on as apprentices. Manson was arrested 2 weeks later during a nighttime raid on a Peoria store. In the investigation that followed, he was linked to earlier armed robberies. He was sent to a strict reform school called Indiana Boys School. At the school, other students allegedly raped Manson with the encouragement of a staff member, and he was repeatedly beaten. He ran away from the school 8 times. While at the school, Manson developed a self-defense technique he later called the insane game. When he was physically unable to defend himself, he would screech, grimace, and wave his arms to convince the bullies that he was insane. After a number of failed attempts to escape, he escaped with 2 other boys in February 1951. The 3 boys were robbing gas stations while attempting to drive to California in stolen cars when they were arrested in Utah for the federal crime of driving a stolen car across state lines. Manson was sent to Washington, D.C.'s National Training School for Boys. When he got there, he was given an aptitude test which determined that he was illiterate. but he had an above average IQ of 109. His caseworker deemed him aggressively antisocial. Now, it makes me feel so sad for Manson as a child. I honestly feel like, this is my personal opinion, maybe if he had the love and care and attention that he needed from loving parents, he may have not turned out the way he was. I mean, his IQ was 109. He could have been really smart, but because he didn't have the schooling he needed, he didn't have a loving mother and father, he didn't have that loving care and home, he found it somewhere else where his family would do whatever he wanted them to do, which that is what they called the cult, was the Manson family. But who's to say? We don't know. We don't know because we can't go back in time. On a psychiatrist's recommendation, Manson was transferred in October 1951 to Natural Bridge Honor Camp, a minimum security institution. His aunt visited him and told administrators she would let him stay at her house and would help him find work. Manson had a parole hearing scheduled for February 1954. However, in January, he was allegedly caught raping a boy at knife point. Manson was transferred to the Federal Reformatory in Pittsburgh, Virginia. There, he committed 8 serious disciplinary offenses, 3 involving homosexual acts. He was then moved to a maximum security reformatory at Chillicothe, Ohio, where he was expected to remain until his release on his 21st birthday in November 1955. Good behavior led to an early release in May 1954 to live with his aunt and uncle in Macmeekin. At the time of his release, he was 20 years old. In January 1955, Manson married a hospital waitress named Rosalie Jean Willis. Around October, about 3 months after he and his pregnant wife arrived in Los Angeles in a car he had stolen in Ohio, Manson was again charged with a federal crime for taking the vehicle across state lines. After a psychiatric evaluation, he was given 5 years probation. Manson's failure to appear at a Los Angeles hearing on an identical charge filed in Florida resulted in his March 1956 arrest in Indianapolis. His probation was revoked, and he was sentenced to 3 years sentence at Terminal Island in Los Angeles. While Manson was in prison, Rosalie gave birth to their son, Charles Manson Jr. During his first year at Terminal Island, Manson received visits from Rosalie and his mother, who were now living together in Los Angeles. In March 1957, when the visits from his wife stopped, his mother informed him Rosalie was living with another man. Less than 2 weeks before a scheduled parole hearing, Manson tried to escape by stealing a car. He was given 5 years probation, and his parole was denied. Manson received 5 years parole in September 1958, the same year in which Rosalie and Manson were divorced. By November, he was pimping out a 16-year-old girl and was receiving additional support from a girl with wealthy parents. In September 1959, he pled guilty to a charge of attempting to cash a forged treasury check, which he claimed to have stolen from a mailbox. The latter charge was later dropped. He received a 10-year suspended sentence and probation after a young woman named Leona, who had an arrest record for prostitution, made a tearful plea before the court that she and Manson were deeply in love and would marry if Charlie was freed. Before the year's end, the woman did marry Manson, possibly so she wouldn't be required to testify against him. Manson took Leona and another woman to New Mexico for purposes of prostitution, resulting in him being held and questioned for violating the Mann Act. Though he was released, Manson correctly suspected that the investigation had not ended. When he disappeared, in violation of his probation, a bench warrant was issued. An indictment for violation of the Mann Act followed in April 1960. Following the arrest of one of the women for prostitution, Manson was arrested in June in Laredo, Texas, and was returned to Los Angeles for violating his probation on the check cashing charge. He was ordered to serve his 10-year sentence. Manson spent a year trying unsuccessfully to appeal the revocation of his probation. In July 1961, he was transferred from the Los Angeles County Jail to the United States Penitentiary at McNeil Island, Washington. There, he took guitar lessons from Barker Karpus gang leader Alvin "Creepy" Karpus, and obtained from another inmate a contact name of someone at Universal Studios in Hollywood, Phil Kaufman. Among his fellow prisoners during this time was Danny Trejo, who participated in several hypnosis sessions, according to Jeff Guinness' 2013 biography of Manson. His mother moved to Washington State to be closer to him during his McNeil Island incarceration, working nearby as a waitress. Although the Mann Act charge had been dropped, the attempt to cash the Treasury check was still a federal offense. Manson's September 1961 annual review noted he had a tremendous drive to call attention to himself, an observation that was echoed in September 1964. In 1963, Leona was granted a divorce. During the process, she alleged that she and Manson had a son, Charles Luther. According to a popular urban legend, Manson auditioned unsuccessfully for the monkeys in late 1965. This is refuted by the fact that Manson was still incarcerated at McNeil Island at this time. In June 1966, Manson was sent for his second time to Terminal Island in preparation for early release. By the time of his release day on March 21st, 1967, he had spent more than half of his 32 years in prison and other institutes. This was mainly because he had broken federal laws. Federal sentences were and remain much more severe than state sentences for many of the same offenses. It is alleged that Manson told the authorities that prison had become his home and he requested permission to stay. Less than a month after his 1967 release from prison, Manson moved to Berkeley from Los Angeles, which could have been a probation violation, but after calling the San Francisco probation office upon his arrival, he was transferred to the supervision of criminology doctoral researcher and federal probation officer Roger Smith. Until the spring of 1968, Smith worked at the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic, also known as HAFMC, which Manson and his family frequented throughout their stay in Haight. Roger Smith, as well as the HAFMC's founder, David E. Smith, received funding from the National Institutes of Health to study the effects of drugs like LSD, methamphetamine, on the counterculture movement in Haight-Ashbury. The patients at the clinic became subject of their research, including Manson and his expanding group of mostly female followers who came to see Roger Smith regularly. Manson received permission from Roger Smith to move from Berkeley to the Haight-Ashbury district in San Francisco. He first took LSD and would use it frequently during his time there. David Smith, who had studied the effects of LSD and amphetamines, wrote that the changes in Manson's personality during this time was the most abrupt Roger Smith had observed in his entire professional career. Manson also read the book Stranger in a Strange Land, a science fiction novel by Robert A. Heinlein, inspired by the free love philosophy in Haight-Ashbury. During the Summer of Love, Manson began preaching his own philosophy based on a mixture of Stranger in a Strange Land, the Bible, Scientology, Dale Carnegie, and the Beatles, which quickly earned him a following. Manson had already gained his first follower at the UC Berkeley campus, librarian Mary Berner. He talked her into letting him sleep at her house for a few nights, an arrangement that quickly became permanent. He then met Lynette Fromm, also known as Squeaky, a runaway teen, and convinced her to live with him and Berner. Manson soon begun to attract large crowds of listeners and some dedicated followers. He targeted individuals for manipulation who were emotionally insecure and social outcast. This is typical of what cult leaders do. In his book, Love Needs Care, about his time at the HAFMC, David Smith claims that Manson attempted to reprogram their minds, submit totally to his will through the use of LSD and unconventional sexual practices that would turn his followers into empty vessels that would accept anything he poured out. Manson family member Paul Watkins testified that Manson would encourage group LSD trips and take lower doses himself to keep his wits about him. Watkins said that Charlie's trip was to program us all to submit. By the end of his stay in the Hyatt in April 1968, Manson had attracted 20 or so followers, all under the supervision of his parole officer, Roger Smith, and many of the staff at the HAFMC. Okay, guys, let's talk about this for a minute. So, Manson is claiming that he started his cult, which he doesn't say it's a cult because he doesn't admit he had followers. I've watched several interviews, which I'll try to post them in the lower comments. Um, but he didn't have followers. He says he just had friends. But the truth is, he had a cult. He was a cult leader. And he built the cult under the supervision of his parole officer and the staff of HAFMC. I would like to know how that could happen. I mean, seriously. How is it the parole officer could allow that to happen? And why, even though they were doing research, were they giving people, especially people like Charles Manson, who was a known criminal, LSD? That's a good question. I would love answers for that. Unfortunately, I literally could not find any. I could not find any answers to that in the research I did. So, okay, I could go on about this for a long time. So we're going to move on so I don't get all distracted and caught up in the LSD given to you by your parole officer. Okay, so the core members of the Manson family eventually included Charles Tex Watson, a musician and former actor, Bobby Beausoleil, a former musician and pornography actor, Mary Berner, which we know was the librarian, Susan Atkins, Linda Kasabian, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Leslie Van Houten. Supervised by his parole officer, Roger Smith, Manson grew his family through drug use and prostitution, without interference from the authorities. Manson was arrested on July 31st, 1967, for attempting to prevent the arrest of one of his followers, Ruth Ann Morehouse. Instead of being sent back to prison, the charge was reduced to a misdemeanor, and Manson was given 3 additional years of probation. He avoided prosecution again in July 1968 when he and the family were arrested while moving from San Francisco to Los Angeles with the permission of Roger Smith, when his bus crashed into a ditch, where Manson and members of his family, including Berner and Manson's newborn baby, were found sleeping naked by police. Afterwards, he was again arrested and released only a few days later, this time on a drug charge. The Manson family developed into a doomsday cult where Manson became fixated on the idea of an apocalyptic race war between Americans' black population and the larger white population. Manson told some of the Manson family that black people in America would rise up and kill all white people except for Manson and his family because that they were not intelligent enough to survive on their own. They would need a white man to lead them. And so they would serve Manson as their master. According to Vincent Bugalosi, in late 1968, Manson adopted the term helter skelter, taken from a song on the Beatles' recently released White Album, to refer to the upcoming war. Okay, guys, I truly believe that all the drugs that Manson had been taking truly messed with his mind. He read into stuff that wasn't even really what he thought it was saying. In early August 1969, some Manson family members committed murders in Los Angeles. The Manson family gained national notoriety after the murder of actress Sharon Tate and four others in her home in August 8th and 9th, 1969. And Leno and Rosemary LaBianca. Sharon Tate was 8.5 months pregnant when she was murdered. She was the wife of film director Roman Polanski. Now, luckily, he was out of town filming, so he luckily was not there when all this happened. Tate's friend, Jay Sebring, a noted celebrity hairstylist, another friend, Frykowski, and his girlfriend, Abigail Folger, heiress to the Folgers coffee fortune, and daughter of Peter Folger. And then Tex Watson and three other members of the family committed the Tate murders and the LaBianca murders, allegedly under Manson's instructions. Now, just remember, if you watch any of his interviews, he denies that he specifically told them to do that. While it was later accepted at trial that Manson never expressly ordered the murders, his behavior was deemed to warrant a conviction of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. Evidence pointed to Manson's obsession with inciting a race war by killing those who he thought were pigs, and his belief that this would show he said a very bad word, N-word, how to do the same. Family members were also responsible for other assaults, thefts, crimes, and the attempted assassination of President Gerald Ford in Sacramento by Lynette Squeaky Fromm. While it is often thought that Manson never murdered or attempted to murder anyone himself, true crime writer James Buddy Day, in his book Hippie Cult Leader: The Last Words of Charles Manson, claimed that Manson shot drug dealer Bernard Crowe on July 1st, 1969, but Crowe survived. Now, I couldn't really find any definitive information about if that actually happened, or should I say, if Manson was the one that actually did it. But supposedly in this book, Manson tells James that he did it. The state of California tried Manson for the Tate and LaBianca murders with co-defendant Leslie Van Houten, Susan Atkins, and Patricia Cranwinkle. Co-defendant Tex Watson was tried at a later date after being extradited from Texas. The trial began on July 15, 1970. Manson appeared wearing fringe buckskins, his typical clothing, at Spahn Ranch. On July 24, 1970, the first day of trial, Manson appeared in court with an X carved in his forehead. His followers issued a statement from Manson saying, "I have X'd myself from your world." The following day, Manson's co-defendants also appeared in court with an X carved in their foreheads. Members of the Manson family camped outside of the courthouse and held a vigil on a street corner because they were excluded from the courtroom for being disruptive. Other members of the Manson family also carved crosses into their foreheads. One day, some members of the Manson family wore saffron robes to the trial, saying if Manson was convicted, they would eliminate themselves, a reference to monks and nuns in Vietnam who set fire to themselves to protest the Vietnam War. The state presented dozens of witnesses during the trial. However, its primary witness was Linda Casbasson, who was present during the Tate murders on August 8th and 9th, 1969. Linda Casabin, who was present during the Tate murders on August 8th and 9th, 1969. Casabin provided graphic testimony of the Tate murders, which she observed from outside the house. She was also in the car with Manson on the following evening when, according to her testimony, he ordered the Labanca killings. Casabin spent days on the witness stand being cross-examined by the defendant's lawyers. After testifying, Casabin went into hiding for the next 40 years. Really can't blame her for hiding. In early August 1970, President Richard Nixon told reporters that he believed that Manson was guilty of the murders, either directly or indirectly. Manson obtained a copy of the newspaper and held up the headline to the jury. The defendant's attorneys then called for a mistrial, arguing that their client had allegedly killed far fewer people than Nixon's war machine in Vietnam. Judge Charles H. Older polled each member of the jury to determine whether each juror saw the headline and whether it affected his or her ability to make an independent decision. All of the jurors confirmed that they could still decide independently. Shortly after, the female defendants, Atkins, Cranwinkle, and Van Houten, were removed from the room for chanting. Nixon says we are guilty, so why go on? On October 5th, 1970, Manson attempted to attack Judge Older while the jury was present in the room. Manson first threatened Older and then jumped over his lawyer's table with a sharpened pencil in the direction of Older. Manson was restrained before reaching the judge. While being led out of the courtroom, Manson screamed at Older, "In the name of Christian justice, someone should cut your head off." Meanwhile, the female defendants began chanting something in Latin. Judge Older began wearing a .38 caliber pistol to the trial afterwards. On November 16, 1970, the state of California rested the case after presenting 22 weeks' worth of evidence. The defendants then stunned the courtroom by announcing that they had no witnesses to present and rested their case. Immediately after defendants' counsel rested their case, the three female defendants shouted that they wanted to testify. Their attorneys advised the court in chambers that they opposed their clients testifying. Apparently, the female defendant wanted to testify that Manson had nothing to do with the murders. The following day, Manson himself announced that he too wanted to testify. The judge allowed Manson to testify outside the presence of the jury. He stated as follows: "These children that come at you with knives, they are your children. You taught them. I didn't teach them. I just tried to help them stand up. Most of the people at the ranch that you call the family were just people that you didn't want. I know this, that in your hearts and your souls, you are as much responsible for the Vietnam War as I am for killing those people. I can't judge any of you. I have no malice against you and no ribbons for you. But I think that it is high time that you start looking at yourselves and judging the lie that you live in. My father is the jailhouse. My father is your system. I am only what you made me. I am only a reflection of you. You want to kill me? Ha! I am already dead. Have been all my life. I've spent 23 years in tombs that you have built." After Manson finished speaking, Judge Older offered to let him testify before the jury. Manson replied that it was not necessary. Manson then told the female defendants that they no longer needed to testify. On November 30th, 1970, Lisa Van Houten's attorney, Ronald Hughes, failed to appear for the closing arguments in the trial. He was later found dead in California State Park. His body was badly decomposed, and it was impossible to tell the cause of death. Hughes had disagreed with Manson during the trial, taking the position that his client, Van Houten, should not testify to claim that Manson had no involvement with the murders. Some have alleged that Hughes may have been murdered by the Manson family. Now again, that's alleged. On January 25th, 1971, the jury found Manson Krenwinkel, and Atkins guilty of first-degree murder in all 7 of the Tate and LaBianca killings. The jury found Van Houten guilty of murder in first degree in the LaBianca killings. After the convictions, the court held a separate hearing before the same jury to determine if the defendant should receive the death sentence. Each of the 3 female defendants took the stand. They provided graphic details of the murders and testified that Manson was not involved. According to the female defendants, they had committed the crimes in order to help fellow Manson family member Bobby Beausoleil get out of jail, where he was being held for the murder of Gray Hinman. The female defendants testified that the Tate LaBianca murders were intended to be copycat crimes similar to the Hinman killing. Atkins, Krenwinkel, and Van Houten claimed they did this under the direction of the state's prime witness, Linda Casaubon. The defendants did not express remorse for the killings. On March 4, 1971, during the sentencing hearing, Manson trimmed his beard to a fork and shaved his head, telling the media, "I am the devil, and the devil always has a bald head." However, the female defendants did not immediately shave their own heads. The state prosecutor, Vincent Bugliosi, later speculated in his book Helter Skelter that they refrained from doing so in order to not appear to be completely controlled by Manson, as they had when they each carved an X in their foreheads earlier in the trial. On March 29, 1971, the jury sentenced all 4 defendants to death. When the female defendants were led into the courtroom, each of them had shaved their heads, as had Manson. After hearing the sentence, Atkins shouted to the jury, "Better lock your doors and watch your children." The Manson murder trial was the longest trial in American history when it occurred, lasting 9.5 months. The trial was among the most publicized American criminal cases of the 20th century and was called the trial of the century. The jury had been sequestered for 225 days, longer than any jury before it. The trial transcript alone ran to 31,716 pages. Okay, I think I'm going to end the first video here. It's about an hour long. So I'm going to end it here. And hopefully I get the second part up to it pretty quick after the first one. So if you like this video, hit the subscribe button down at the bottom. Make sure you click the bell so you get notifications when part 2 of this one comes out. See you in the next one.